Hebrews 11 is the Faith Hall of Fame. And let's read the first 6 verses. I'm going to talk about the whole chapter. But let's read the first 6 verses. Have y'all found it? If y'all will stand with me. You're going to be very familiar with what I'm about to read. Hebrews 11, 1 through 6. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. God's people said, amen. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, so this is the Faith Hall of Fame. We're going to go through what the people of the Old Testament did and why they're bragged on, why we celebrate them and what they did. And he starts off with Abel bringing a better gift than Cain did. You know the story. Abel brought an animal sacrifice. Cain brought a grain sacrifice. And God accepted Abel's sacrifice. Now we don't know what all was said behind the scenes. We just know what was written in the Scripture. And what Hebrews is saying here is that Abel is still celebrated. He still speaks even though he's dead. And what he means is, earlier in Hebrews, he had said that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. And so the animal sacrifice, blood was shed. And of course that was symbolic of Jesus coming and shedding his blood, giving his life for us. In other words, the wages of sin is grain. No. The wages of sin is death. Which shows how serious God takes sin, because it separates us from him, and it hurts us, and it hurts our loved ones. And so this is why he's talking about Abel here, that he, by faith, he brought a better sacrifice. And he talks about Enoch, and the thing that's famous about Enoch is that he's going along one day, and God just took him home. And so he starts way back. And in fact, he says, by faith, we understand. So he's going back to the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. He's saying that by faith we understand that God created everything that we see out of what was not seen. My son David has ex nihilo tattooed on his wrist. It's just kind of a little reminder. Ex nihilo, which is out of nothing. That God spoke everything into existence. Now it takes faith to understand this. Remember, there's a whole bunch of people in the world that think we're fools for believing in creation, believing that God spoke the universe into existence. And as we've studied this summer, the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing, right? And so it's faith that gets us over that hump. It's faith that allows us to understand. But what I want us to see this morning is that there's 2 passive verbs. We're going to talk about verbs today. There's 2 passive verbs here in these first 6 verses, and then there are no more. And what do I mean by passive verbs? Well, understand. When you understand, it's something that happens in here. It's not something that you're doing. It's something that happens in here. It's more of a passive verb. And belief is the same way. That if you believe something, that's happening in here, right? So it's kind of a passive verb. But after verse 6, there are no more passive verbs, not one. The word believe or believe is not ever spoken again in this chapter. We're going to see what verbs are used here in just a minute. But we're not there yet. And so we build our foundation off of belief. I mean, it starts with belief. You know, whosoever believes in me. And what's the work the Father requires? To believe. So it begins, that's where faith begins, is believing that there is a God and that he rewards those who seek him. But then faith is having confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. You know, we say, well, if I see it, I'll believe it. But faith says, I believe it whether I see it or not because I believe in God. And so that's the difference. And so what we see here is that the ancients were commended for what they did with their faith, not just for having it. And that's what I really want to get across this morning. Is you got to have the faith. You got to have the belief. You got to believe in God. You got to understand that he's the creator. But that's just the beginning. It's what you do with it that proves that you have it. Now I've got to go back to James chapter 2. You might want to keep your finger here and flip over one book to James to the right. James 2. And I'm just going to read this to us. I've edited it just a little bit so I can read it faster. But beginning with verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not faith alone. And James is just saying as clearly as he can that if you can't say, I have a square, but it's a circle. There's no such thing as a square circle. You can't say, I have a square, but it's a circle. No, he's saying, if you have a square, then it's going to be square. And if you have faith, then you're going to do something with it. He says, would that kind of faith save you? If you said, yeah, I believe in God, and in this same chapter, and it's the part that I skipped in here just for time's sake, but right in here in the middle of all this, he said, even the demons believe and tremble, but it doesn't save them. So head knowledge is not enough. Mental assent is not enough. It's got to move you into action. It's got to make you do something, or it's not there. It's kind of like a square circle. It doesn't exist. And this is what he's saying. It's not there unless something happens with it. And when we look at Hebrews 11, at this Faith Hall of Fame, I want us to look at the verbs that are used describing what these ancients did. So if you go ahead and put that up, Roy, those the verbs. Now look at all of them. Now let's just run through these. We understand. Abel brought. Enoch was taken. Okay, those are the three that we've already seen. And now it continues. Noah built an ark. Abraham obeyed and went. Abraham made his home in the promised land and lived in tents. Sarah was enabled to bear children. Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham reasoned Now what did he reason? Remember that? He reasoned that God could bring Isaac back from the dead. And he said, and basically that's what he did. Because God stopped him and said, don't do this. I mean, this was a symbolic thing. And so, to me, that is a good faith verb. He reasoned. He thought it out. He thought it through. Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Jacob blessed Joseph's sons. Now, we'll need to talk about that someday. Jacob, here's one you're going to like, worshipped as he leaned on his staff. Do you see that is a verb that you do because you have faith? You worship. Joseph spoke about the Exodus and gave instructions about the burial of his bones. Moses' parents hid him and were not afraid. Moses refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh. Moses chose to be mistreated. Moses regarded, this is interesting that Hebrews says this, talking about Moses. Moses regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than treasures of Egypt. I think this is Paul writing this, but the writer of Hebrews says Moses regarded for the sake of Christ. He's connecting Moses and Christ. Moses kept the Passover. And then what happened? The people passed through the Red Sea on dry land. So they passed through. But they're passing through the Red Sea on dry land. And then this was kind of a reverse one. Jericho's walls fell. You remember they circled around for 7 days and they blew the trumpets, and on the seventh day the walls fell. And so because of their faith, this barrier came down. This barrier was broken. The wall came down, and they took the city, and then they took the land. You know, if they could take Jericho, they could take all of the promised land. That was kind of the gateway into the promised land. And so when the walls fell, they took it. And then Rahab welcomed the spies. And then he sort of summarizes here. He talks about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. And he says they conquered, that's a good verb, isn't it? They conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions. What story is he talking about there? Did I hear anybody say Daniel? Daniel? Okay. He shut the mouths of lions. Remember that? Quenched the fury of flames. Who was that? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Escaped the edge of the sword. Became powerful. Routed foreign armies. I like that one. That's a good verb. They routed foreign armies. And then the last one is women received back their dead. Now that's the whole chapter. That's all of the verbs in chapter 11. And I want you to notice that these are action verbs. You see, when we believe in God and when we put our trust in Him and when we have faith, when we're a person of faith, we move. We move into action. We do something because that's what it does. You can't have faith without actions. That's what James is trying to tell us. If you have faith, sitting here in this room this morning, if you have faith, it has moved you to do something. This idea of a passive faith where nothing ever happens, just James is saying that's a square circle. It doesn't exist. Now, I've got a little assignment for you. You know, school starts tomorrow. And if I could get the elders to come and grab the cards and the pencils. They're already sharpened. And pass them around to everybody. And I want one too. Should have enough. So what do I want you to do? I want you to think about, if the writer of Hebrews is writing about you after you're gone, what verb would he use about you? Now, I really want you to come up with 3. 3 is just a good biblical number. What verb would someone use to describe you because of your faith? I really want you to come up with 3 that you've done. And I think if you look at this list, you're going to see some things that you can easily use. But I want you to write something down that maybe is unique to you. And then after you write those 3, I want you to really think about this and pray about this. And I'm watching the clock here. I'm just going to give us a few minutes. You don't need that long. I want you to write something that you would like to be said about you. It's just a verb. It's just a word, a verb. But it's got to be an action verb.